Hello, I'm Bob Weeks for Wichita Liberty TV, your weekly source for news, analysis, and commentary about Wichita and Kansas government and public affairs. Broadcast on KGP 26.1, also its companion website, kgp26.com. Some of you may know me from my blog, The Voice for Liberty, at wichitaliberty.org. The motto there is individual liberty, limited government, and free markets in Wichita and Kansas. If you'd like to learn more about the issues covered today or to contact me, please visit wichitaliberty.org. You can subscribe to the email newsletter, like The Voice for Liberty on Facebook, and follow me, Bob Weeks, on Twitter. Well, this week on Wichita Liberty TV, Cato Institute Senior Fellow Michael Tanner heads research into a variety of domestic policies with a particular emphasis on poverty and social welfare policy, health care reform, and Social Security. Tanner's new book, Going for Broke, Deficits, Debt, and the Entitlement Crisis, was released in June. He is also the author of numerous other books on public policy. Under Tanner's direction, Cato launched the Project on Social Security Choice, which is widely considered the leading impetus for transforming the soon-to-be bankrupt system into a private savings program. Tanner's writings have appeared in nearly every major American newspaper, including the New York Times, Washington Post, Los Angeles Times, Wall Street Journal, and USA Today. He writes a weekly column for National Review Online and is a contributing columnist with the New York Post. A prolific writer and frequent guest lecturer, Tanner appears regularly on network and cable news programs. Now, my interview with Michael Tanner. Well, Michael Tanner, welcome to Wichita Liberty TV. So, recently, a friend of mine shared an article with me on Facebook. It was from a progressive source, and it said the deficit's been coming down over the past several years. And my friend could not believe that. So I think a lot of times people have confusion about what is the deficit, what is the debt, how are the two related, and things like that.
Well, the deficit is the shortfall in any given year. It's how much this year we will spend in excess of the taxes that we take in. And it has been coming down. It's come down significantly. It was only about 5 years ago that we were running a $1.4 trillion deficit. Now this year it's only going to be about $450 billion. So if you're a glass half full type of guy, you say, wahoo, we've cut the $1 trillion from the deficit. If you're glass half empty, you know we still owe $450 billion more than we're taking in. Now the debt is what all those deficits add up to. Think about it this way. In any given week, maybe you spend more money at home than you take in through your paycheck. It's not the end of the world if you do that. But if you do it every week, week after week, month after month, year after year, you're going to get yourself in trouble. And that's essentially what the government's doing. So we now have an $18 trillion debt.
And to put that in context, the gross domestic product of the United States is a little bit less than that, isn't it?
That's right. We owe 101% of our gross domestic product. That means we actually owe more than the value of everything we produce in this country over the course of a year. It's as if your credit card bills exceeded your entire take-home pay, or entire pre-tax pay for that matter.
So it seems like a bad deal, but I'm thinking of some economists like Paul Krugman who says, well, we owe that money to ourselves. You know, we're just taking it out of one pocket and putting it in the other or something like that. Is there a fallacy behind that line of thinking?
Well, there's a couple fallacies to it. The first is that we don't actually owe it to ourselves. We owe it to future generations of ourselves, who are not necessarily the same people. It's we're consuming it today, and other people in the future are going to have to pay the bill. Now, trading current consumption for future debt does make sense in some circumstances. If you take on debt to go to college so that in the future you'll earn higher wages to pay that debt back, that's a good investment of your money. The problem is that most federal spending is not investment. Only about 13%, in fact, of federal spending is actually something that's investment, building roads and bridges or something
that's
like
durable,
that.
That's right.
That's going to make that's going to make higher productivity in the future.
Right.
That's going to enable our children to earn higher wages. Most of it is just a transfer payment, where I take money from you and I give it to this person over here, and then I take money from them and give it back to you. That does nothing to make the economy any bigger in the future. So you gain nothing out of that.
And examples of transfer payments are Social Security, I believe, is perhaps the biggest, but Medicare and Medicaid, are they also transfer payments?
Sure, Medicare and Medicaid, welfare payments, farm price supports, corporate grants, all those sorts of things. Basically anything where they take money from one person and give it to someone else.
Now, some people might say, well, okay, if I go to the grocery store, they're taking money from me. How is that different than the government doing the same thing, kind of?
Well, in a sense, that's exactly correct. You're simply giving money to the grocery store. You haven't grown anything. You haven't made the economy any bigger in that regard. Mm-hmm. What happens is you actually have to get someone to produce something new. Now, the grocery store ultimately gives it to a farmer who plants more crops and so on, so things get bigger along the way, or the grocery store hires more people and so on. So ultimately, in the private sector, it gets bigger. But if it's simply moving money back and forth, if I give you $10 today and you give it back to me next week, we haven't done anything. Mm-hmm. Bastiat used to talk about the broken window fallacy, and he talked about the idea that economists thought, well, if a boy breaks a window in a restaurant, then the restaurant will have to hire a glazier to fix the window. Everybody's better off. Isn't it a wonderful thing that he broke the window? But the reality was that restaurateur might have used the money he now has to use to fix a window to buy books or to hire a new waiter or to do other things with. So you're not actually improving things.
Yeah, we've talked about that quite a bit in past episodes of Wichita Liberty TV, and that is, I think, one of the biggest problems about government spending is, I think Henry Hazlitt uses the term the concentrated benefits but dispersed costs. People look at something like the sugar subsidy, makes a few people very well off, but for everybody else they're paying another 1 or 2 or 5 cents per pound of sugar, and it's not really worth their effort to get involved in that case.
Sure. I mean, every program has its beneficiaries. That's why they exist. Mm-hmm. There's winners. And any cut of government spending is going to create losers as well as the winners. The problem is the losers feel the pain a lot more intensely than the winners do, and so they have much more reason to go out and fight.
Yeah, and the bigger our government is, I think the higher the payoff of some of this seeking for government intervention. And I can't think of the figures I've seen about how much is spent on lobbying the federal government, but it's a big industry because there's a lot of money there.
Well, there's a reason why the wealthiest counties in the nation are those outside of Washington, D.C.
Yeah, and they are absolutely that way. So, well, I can see that we're running up against the limit for a commercial break, so we'll be right back in a few minutes on Wichita Liberty TV. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks, and with me, Michael Tanner of the Cato Institute. So I think in your book, Going for Broke, you spend a lot of time talking about entitlements as one of the biggest problems that have led to our debt and something that we've got to solve in the future. And I think that some people may not totally understand what is entitlement spending as opposed to other types of spending that government does.
I do think this is something that people misunderstand. I hear a lot people say, well, Social Security is not an entitlement because I paid into it, or Medicare is not an entitlement, I had to pay payroll taxes for that. An entitlement doesn't mean welfare. An entitlement means automatic spending. It's an accounting term or a legal term that means a program that's not subject to annual appropriation. So Congress doesn't vote every year on how much they'll spend on Social Security, how much they'll spend on Medicare. If you're eligible for the program, you receive the benefits automatically, and the government has to spend whatever is necessary to take care of the program under those parameters. And it's the vast majority of federal spending. People like to talk about cutting waste, fraud, and abuse, or getting rid of sort of these little programs. People want to get rid of foreign aid, or kill Big Bird, or defund Planned Parenthood. Exactly, public broadcasting. That's right. So, but you have to look at these things. Foreign aid's 1% of federal spending. Public broadcasting and Planned Parenthood combined are 1/1000% of federal spending. But Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, the three big entitlement programs, they're 50% of federal spending. Half of everything the federal government spends is for those three programs. So you really can't do much about the budget unless you're willing to go there.
And so that's not to say we should not get rid of waste, fraud, and abuse. We should, but that's not going to fix the problem.
Oh, sure. I mean, look, nobody's in favor of waste, fraud, and abuse. I think it was Jimmy Carter was the first president to promise to get rid of it. We never seem to. But I'm all for getting rid of that. I'm all for getting rid of even a lot of these programs if we can't find the waste in them because they're counterproductive for other reasons. But all domestic discretionary spending combined, that's everything from the FDA to the FBI, Department of Commerce, Department of Education, all of it together is 16% of federal spending. And it's going down. It's actually been a smaller percentage of federal spending than it's ever been. So we really can't get there from here.
And I know another big budget in the another big item in the federal budget is military spending, but even that is less than entitlements, isn't it?
16%, exactly the same as domestic discretionary spending. And while I certainly believe there are things we can cut in the defense budget, that's not something you're going to take to zero, certainly. That's a legitimate function of government. So that you're not going to get the money there either. You've got to deal with entitlements if you want to rein in the debt we're facing.
So I think a lot of people get discouraged, or they may make the argument that, well, these entitlements are on autopilot. There's nothing we can do. If you're 65, you automatically qualify for Medicare. But that's not really true, is it? I mean, these parameters, such as the retirement age, someone created those, and they can be changed, can't they?
Well, sure, absolutely. And in fact, they have been changed in the past. When I started paying Social Security taxes, for example, I was told I could retire at age 65 with full benefits. But Alan Greenspan and the Greenspan Commission and under the Reagan in '83 changed that. And they said, oops, you know, too bad, we lied, and now you're going to have to work to age 67 before you can collect those benefits. There's no legal right to Social Security or Medicare. The Supreme Court ruled in two important cases. The first was Helvering versus Davis in 1937, I believe it was, and the second was in 1960 in a case called Nestor versus Fleming, that Social Security taxes are just a tax. They're just like any other tax. They're not a contribution to your own retirement or anything like that. They're simply a tax. And Social Security payments are simply a government spending program, no different functionally than, say, farm price supports. And government is free to change the benefits or reduce them or take them away anytime it wants. You don't have the court said you don't have a legal, contractual, or property right in Social Security benefits.
You know, a lot of times we hear Social Security referred to as the third rail of politics, something that people feel they're entitled to because, you know, the government has told us, like you say, it's not really a contract that we can enforce. There's no account in the federal government that says Bob Weeks or Michael Cannon. Unlike my private retirement savings, there is, you know, a Bob Weeks account, and presumably one with yourself as well, and that's money that we own, while Social Security benefits we don't really own. That seems to me to be a problem of incentives, because if you are saving for your own retirement, then I think you have a rooting interest in the success of our country, growing the value of your investments. With Social Security, all we do is fight about it.
Well, that's right. A private investment grows or falls with the success of the country, where Social Security benefits are determined politically. And I think what people need to realize is that when they pay their Social Security taxes, none of that money is saved or put away for their retirement. None of it is invested in anything. It simply goes out the door to pay for people who are already retired, and then you hope that people behind you will be pay into the system to support you. In many ways, it's just like any other pyramid scheme. And it was very good for people at the top of the pyramid. The very first Social Security recipient was a woman from Ludlow, Vermont named Ida Mae Fuller.
I think I've heard of that.
And she paid about $18 in Social Security taxes and collected $30,000 or so in Social Security benefits. So she really made out. The people at the top of the pyramid do. People who are retired today got back everything they paid into Social Security with interest and more besides. But the younger you are, the less well you're going to do. Someone retiring today, well, they'll get back about a 2% return on their money. And a young person, they're going to be lucky if they get back what they paid in. Many of them will die before they even get back what they paid into the system, let alone any return on that money.
And the tragedy is, if they had their own private investment accounts, IRAs, or whatever it may be, even if they do die, even if they tragically die the day after they retire, they have an asset that passes down to their heirs or charity or whatever they've decided to do with that. And that's not the case with Social Security at all.
That's absolutely right. I mean, think about the case of a single mother raising a couple of kids. She's paying 12.5% of her wages into the Social Security system. Yeah, if she were to die at age 64, and her kids are over 18, so they're not eligible for survivor's benefits, all the money that she's paid into the Social Security system just goes poof. It goes away. Not one penny of it goes to those kids that they can use to go to college or start a small business or take care of themselves. It's simply gone. Remarkably unfair system.
And I think you mentioned 12.5% of her salary, but a lot of people will say, no, I only pay the 6 and whatever. My employer pays the other half, but that's kind of a fiction too, isn't it?
That's right. What most economists will tell you is that you simply got lower wages so that the employer paid those taxes. That an employer cares about total compensation. He doesn't really care how it's divided up. He knows how much it costs to employ you. And whether that's in wages or taxes or health insurance or 401k contribution or free parking space, it's all the same to him. It doesn't matter how he's dividing it up. It's just going to be the same amount of money.
Thank you. Well, let's take another moment for a commercial break from Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks, and with me this week, Michael Tanner of the Cato Institute. So in the last segment, you were talking about Social Security is not really an investment program, it's spending. The benefits that we pay on our paychecks is pretty much immediately transferred to current retirees. But at the same time, we're told that there's this trust fund with $2.5 trillion or some huge number of that in it. It makes it sound like Social Security has been investing for us on our behalf.
Yeah, I think people don't understand that the trust fund is really simply an accounting measure of how much the federal government owes to Social Security. Look at it this way. Until fairly recently, Social Security ran a small surplus. That is, it took in more in taxes than it was spending on benefits. Now, that extra money has to go somewhere. They can't put it in a cigar box and bury it out behind the Treasury Department. So what they do is they buy a government bond. And when you buy the government bond, once the money is used to buy the bond, that money becomes general revenue of the federal government. And it goes to wherever the federal government spends money, whether it's building roads and bridges or invading Middle Eastern nations, that's gone, is spent. And what remains behind is this bond. But when that bond becomes due, the federal government has to go over to general revenues and ask the rest of the federal government to pay back the money to redeem that bond. This year, Social Security is going to run about a $65 billion deficit. That is, it's going to spend $65 billion more in benefits than it takes in taxes. So the federal government will go to that trust fund, take out $65 billion in bonds, and to ask the rest of the federal government to come up with $65 billion to pay them off. The federal government is running a deficit. Where's it going to get the $65 billion? The only place it can get it is to borrow it. So it's the same thing as if not had a trust fund.
Yeah, that's really, I think, confusing to some people, but I think it's a fiction that really hurts us. So far we've been talking about government at the federal level, but as we know, there are cities, counties, school districts, and other levels of government. Do some of them have the same type of troubles that the federal government budget has?
Well, in a couple of ways. Some have direct debt. For example, Puerto Rico, which we've been reading a great deal about, has issued bonds that it simply cannot pay back. I mean, that's sort of like not being able to pay off the $18 trillion national debt. Other states have problems with their pension systems in terms of future liabilities, the unfunded liabilities. And we have this with Social Security as well, more than $26 trillion in future liabilities in Social Security. That's because you can calculate in the future roughly what a program's going to owe. I mean, we know how many people are going to be retired, what their benefits are going to be, and so on. And we know how much revenue is going to come in, how many people are working, and what the taxes are on them. And there's a gap between the two. That's the unfunded liabilities of a program. And Social Security, just say it's about $26 trillion gap. But states like Illinois and California have huge
Kansas
gaps as well.
Kansas is pretty bad on its pension. And our solution is to borrow to make contributions to that pension plan. So I don't know if that really does us any good or not.
Well, it's just trading one type of debt for another. I mean, people pretend that the pension debt doesn't really exist because it's not due tomorrow. But the reality is it's just as big a debt. And in fact, the U.S. debt, if you take the $18 trillion we owe for national debt, plus about $26 trillion of Social Security debt, and about $43 trillion or so in Medicare debt that we owe in unfunded liabilities, our real debt in this country is close to $90 trillion.
Wow, that's a lot. And I think the problem is sometimes, like with our pension plan in Kansas, it's a problem that needs a solution, not really next year, but over the next 20, 30, or 40 years or something like that. It's real tempting for politicians to say, well, we'll take care of that next year, and that just goes on, and eventually I think that contributes to some of the problems we have.
Absolutely, and that's the problem with the federal government now, and that's actually why I wrote Going for Broke. is we are right now in a period in which things look a little bit better. As we started off the show, we talked about the fact that the budget deficit has fallen from 1.4 trillion to about 450 billion. But that's only going to last for a couple of years. According to the Congressional Budget Office, in about 2 years that budget deficit starts to grow again, and by 2025 it's going to be back to $1 trillion a year. The debt at that point will be $26 to $28 trillion. We are going basically along the same path that countries like Greece have followed. If we don't act during this small window of opportunity, we're going to be in real trouble in the future.
So what are some of the reforms or action we need to take starting today and next year to make sure that that doesn't happen?
Well, I think the answers are pretty obvious. If you have more money going out than you have coming in, you have to either bring in more money or reduce the amount going out. And unfortunately, there's no way to tax your way out. You know, they always talk about, we'll raise taxes on the rich a little bit. I say that, you know, that's that sort of small thinking. Why don't we just confiscate it? Why don't we just take it all? But do you realize if you actually took every penny that belonged to everybody who earned $1 million or more last year, that you wouldn't even have enough to pay off the national debt? You'd only get about $17.5 trillion. It wouldn't even pay off the national debt, let alone the unfunded liabilities in the future.
Yeah.
You can't tax your way out of this. So we're going to have to go over to the other side and deal with spending. And that means you're going to have to go to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, and you're going to have to cut those programs in the future.
Now, so are you talking about cutting my mom's Social Security? Hi, Mom. Or what exactly do you mean by reforming Social Security?
Sure, I don't think anybody's talking about dealing with people who are retired now or even close to retirement. I mean, it's a little bit unfair to sort of yank the rug out from them. But we're going to have to face up and be honest with young people. We're going to have to look them in the eye and say, look, we lied to you. You're not going to get the benefits that are promised. We simply can't pay them. And then we're going to find a way to reduce the benefits slowly over time for those young people to bring the system back into balance for both Social Security and Medicare. And, you know, frankly, I think if we're going to punish them in that way for something that they weren't responsible for, didn't do, then we owe them something in return, like letting them save some of their money in personal accounts and getting some real benefits out of private accounts and Social Security. But either way, we're going to have to face up to the fact that we're not paying them the benefits we promised.
So, yeah, so that, and do you think young people, millennials and so forth, do you think they realize that, or?
Yeah, I think they know that. The problem is it's just in the distance. It's not an immediate problem for them, so they don't vote on it.
Yeah.
Things like gay marriage or the war, things like that they feel very personally, immediately. Telling them, well, Social Security is going to be broke in 30 years, well, that's not going to get them out to vote. And so the likelihood of your voting is roughly the equivalent of your age. 70% of 70-year-olds vote, 30% of 30-year-olds. No wonder Congress is happy to give benefits to the 70-year-olds and the bill to the 30-year-old.
Yeah, because, yeah, they vote. So I think we have time for one last question, which is simply, are you optimistic that we can overcome these challenges?
I think we don't have any choice. You know, it's an old saying that says that which cannot go on forever eventually stops. Or as Maggie Thatcher said, welfare states eventually run out of other people's money. We're going to stop. The question is going to be whether it's going to be a soft landing if we start now and make some reforms and gradually phase this in, or we're going to face a hard landing, like something like what Greece is facing right now. Either way, we're going to come down and land. It's just a question of how big a splat.
Well, very good. Well, Michael Tanner, thank you for appearing on Wichita Liberty TV.
It's been my pleasure.
And that's all for this week on Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks.